I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco, Hotchkiss, House, Rouse,
Here.
Self, White, Mayor Schneider.
Here. Any changes to the agenda?
Yes, there's one minor change, Madam Mayor. On item number 10, that's the setting the public hearing for the Valverde appeal. The time there should read 4 p.m., not 2 p.m.
Okay, so maybe when we approve the consent calendar, we can make that amendment. Okay, thank you. Public comment, I have a couple of speaker slips. We'll start with Mike Jordan and followed by Jeff Bard, and I believe one more is coming up.
Afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. I watched last week's presentation on recycling and food scraps with a little disappointment. Just seems like, I know it's probably been 3 years, but it just seems like less time than that we all went through the process of selling that program to the business community. And as I'm sure several of you will remember, some of us invested a little bit of time into getting that program out in front of people like the Downtown Organization and the Lodging and Restaurant Association, while staff concentrated on the larger users for the bigger bang for the buck. And while I understand and recognize that there's at least 4 or 5 components of that rate increase, 2 of them are at least representative by miscalculations or projections in the revenue stream of the food scrap and the recycling component. And I know there's going to be bigger challenges that come when you start talking about capacities and other high-tech methods of dealing with waste. And I would encourage you, as you did last week, but I don't know where it goes from there, but as you did last week, to continue to ask hard questions on how they're getting to those rate increases, why we're in the position of having miscalculated the projections. And so when we come to the future hard decisions, we don't dig out of a hole with our constituencies but rather be building on success stories and those type of issues rather than what would be less than successes. Thank you.
Jeff Bard will be followed by Ethel Thomas Rezalewski, and then final speaker will be Michael Gray.
Madam Mayor, members of council, I'd like to acknowledge and thank and compliment the people from Youths in the Media who were here last night and also during the CDBG hearings, and the folks from Pueblo and other parts of the Chicano Mexicano community who constitute 38% of this town, but yet are not properly reflected in the Constitution of City Council. I'd also like to compliment members of the AFSCME Local 3930 who have been turning out for the Board of Supervisors and making their concerns known. I recently also noted some public official participation in the Multicultural Center, for which I did distribute a schedule to this council a week or 2 ago. The event was a documentary, a very painful to watch documentary on the mistreatment of the Braceros. This was certainly a blot on our history, but it's also important to realize it was not the United States that perpetrated these injustices against labor. It was specific individuals, specific companies, specific corporations, and perhaps even specific senators and government agencies who were aware of the abuses and covered them up. But it was also American citizens, and perhaps some Mexican citizens as well, who exposed the injustices and came forward and worked to reform the injustices against the Braceros. And it is our freedom in the United States that makes it possible to even discuss the Bracero program. During the time that these Braceros were being exploited, some of my ancestors were subjected to communist tanks or communist trucks coming into our villages, confiscating every kernel of wheat that could be found, and millions of people starved because of communism. So as shameful as the Bracero program was, it's no excuse to heed Hugo Chavez's more extreme moments and theories. So let's all keep perspective and remember the Braceros. Thank you.
Ethel Thomas Rezalewski.
Mayor Schneider, members of the Santa Barbara City Council, Ethel Thomas Rezolitsky is the name of the administrator of sbschooltalk.com. That website is exposing school and government corruption. Since it is my son's birthday today, I want to explain that the last name, Rezolitsky, is to honor my son, Reuben Walker Eliyahu Smith. Sol, S-O-L, is son, lit, Z-sky. He was a gift to me after I married my husband on the Great Peace March as a stranger. I don't have time to share the gifts that I have for my son, but he is the apple of my eye, and the apple is a well-known symbol for our teachers. Our school system is dysfunctional. I am asking you for, I don't know how many times it's been, to investigate the school-to-prison pipeline. It was created here by Bill Cerrone and his cronies, along with Tom Sneddon. I'm asking that you call in a federal grand jury to investigate misallocation of taxpayer funds. That would be the loan program that gave money, taxpayers' money, to your colleagues in government to buy a home when 50 people every year died on our streets because they didn't have a home.
You need to wind up, please.
Okay. There's misallocation of the taxpayer money. The gang task force, I've asked many times, to investigate whose pockets that money went into.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Gray, be the final speaker.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of Council. My name is Michael Gray. I'm here as a member of the Citizens Planning Association Board of Directors. I was a member of the City Planning Commission for 7 years in the 1980s. I'm here to support Plan Santa Barbara. I'm here to ask you to break the inertia and move forward with the plan. After more than 9 years and a large chunk of the taxpayers' money, it's time to get the plan approved. Someday you'll retire from public service and look back on what you did. If you're not able to get Plan Santa Barbara approved, I believe as you look back on your public service and your service to the people of Santa Barbara, you will deeply regret that you were not able to make the compromises necessary and build the consensus necessary to get the plan approved. Please do not let the people down. You know this is something that can be done and should be done. Your legacy as a valuable and productive leader of our community is at stake. And thank you for your service.
That closes public comment. Move on to the consent calendar. Does there anyone need to move any item off, or is there a motion to approve it? Oh, and you have to read a few things. Go right ahead. I knew that.
Item 2, amendment of county-wide citing element, recommending that council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara adding the proposed Los Flores Ranch integrated waste management facility to the county-wide citing element, a regional solid waste planning document as prescribed by the California Public Resources Code. And item 3, acceptance of street easements for sidewalk improvements, recommending that council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara accepting street easements for the installation and use of public sidewalk access ramps and related improvements on portions of the real properties commonly known as 1131 Coast Village Road, 30 West Calle Laureles, and 628 West Mission Street, authorizing City Public Works Director to execute same and consenting to the recordation by City Clerk of said street easement deeds in the official records, County of Santa Barbara.
Thank you. Without further objection, we'll waive further reading. Okay, now is there anything that needs to be taken off, or is there a motion to approve? Please note the motion should include the amendment for the date change on item 10, time change to 4 o'clock.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, and that includes the amendment. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That passes. Report. There we go. Report from the Finance Committee, Mr. Francisco.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the Finance Committee met today and heard a report from staff on our reserve policies, which were enacted by the city in 1995, and had a little bit of discussion about those policies and decided that we will bring to the full council an agenda item to give direction to the Finance Committee to come up with some proposals on not simply the levels of reserve, but the policy around use of reserves.
Great. Thank you. I look forward to that. We've been talking about that for years. So, report from the Ordinance Committee, Mr. House.
Yes, thank you. The Ordinance Committee met today and discussed REACH codes, energy efficiency standards, and as directed by Council, we decided that prior to making a recommendation to City Council that the committee would work with staff to host a work session similar to one that was recently held in Carpinteria on energy efficiency in the built environment, and then come back and deliberate on the matter again before we come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Item number 15.
Medical marijuana dispensary ordinance amendment for dispensaries permitted under the March 2008 dispensary ordinance, recommending that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending the municipal code to establish revised regulations for those storefront medical marijuana dispensaries permitted under City Ordinance number 5449 as adopted on March 25, 2008.
Thank you. Mr. Wiley?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. This ordinance is before you based on the recommendation of the City Attorney's Office and in connection with 2 federal lawsuits that are currently pending against the city, challenging the city's June 2010 medical marijuana dispensary ordinance, specifically challenging the fact that that ordinance allowed the permitted non-conforming dispensaries only 180-day amortization period. And as you know, as you've been advised previously, last fall, a federal court judge, in ruling on a motion for a preliminary injunction filed by one of the dispensaries, ruled that at least on a pretrial basis, on the basis of the record before him at that point, he felt that the 180-day amortization period might be unconstitutional. So the ordinance before you today revises the uncodified provisions of the city's June 2010 ordinance. And it was one of those uncodified provisions that imposed this 180-day amortization period. So obviously that's what the City Attorney's Office is suggesting be amended. The 180-day period if this ordinance were adopted, that 180-day period would become a 4-year period, 4 years from the date of the adoption of the June 2010 ordinance, or June of 2014. The operational provisions of the municipal code with respect to dispensaries would continue to apply to these non-conforming dispensaries. So the day-to-day operation would still have to be, of these 2 dispensaries, would still have to be in conformance with the city's municipal code, Chapter 2880, with respect to, for example, record-keeping requirements, the hours of operation, who could be a member of the collective or cooperative, where the marijuana could come from. All of those day-to-day operational provisions would continue to apply to these non-conforming dispensaries. I think, as you know, these dispensaries were permitted under the March of 2008 ordinance that the city initially adopted regulating storefront dispensary, and they were permitted after appeals to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission essentially denied the appeals and granted the permits for these 2 dispensaries. These dispensaries would not be allowed to transfer their permits. That's, again, part of the existing codified part of the ordinance. But after 4 years, they would be required to either shut down or to have
obtained a permit for a new location, a new permissible location in the meantime. So at some point, they'll either have to go back through the process for a new location or they'll have to shut down in June of 2014. Finally, I want to emphasize that nothing that this ordinance would do will change the fact that the City Attorney's Office, the Police Department, and in cooperation with the District Attorney's Office, we will continue to prosecute dispensaries and individuals who operate contrary to state law, specifically who operate contrary to the Compassionate Use Act and the Medical Marijuana Program Act, the state laws that the state legislature enacted to implement the that was 216, I believe, 215 in 1996, to implement the Compassionate Use Act. So, for example, the Compassionate Use Act requires that the only people with access to marijuana are qualified patients. That, in other words, the only people who may be provided medical marijuana are those individuals who have received a recommendation from a licensed physician that they could use or medical marijuana might help them. Similarly, the only people who can provide medical marijuana to qualified patients are what are defined as primary caregivers. And as I think you know, as I've mentioned in the past, the concept of primary caregiver, if you look at how the state law defines it, and in fact it's a term that comes from the Compassionate Use Act, generally it's thinking in terms of a family member or a very close friend who provides the medical marijuana, maybe even cultivates the medical marijuana to, as I say, a family member or a close friend because they are, because for health reasons, unable to do it themselves. But as we're dealing with the fact that in interpreting the state laws, the Attorney General's office determined that there can be some circumstances where this relationship can be on a cooperative, collective basis. And, I think most of us know and understand the concept of a cooperative, where it's shared labor, shared expenses, and almost by its nature, it's a fairly small number of individuals. And in August of 2008, the State Attorney General's office issued regulations that say there can be circumstances, and clearly they were thinking of limited circumstances, very limited circumstances, where groups of people, small groups of people, could cooperatively cultivate marijuana and provide it to the qualified patients in that group of individuals. And they could do this on a storefront basis, but really since that time, since 2007, 2008, cities have been dealing with the fact that it required cities to regulate storefront dispensaries in some ways, or as I think, say, the city of Los Angeles saw, there was a tremendous number of these things that opened all at the same time without regulation. And I think Santa Barbara was seeing a bit of that in 2008 and 2009. But again, I want to go back to the fact that nothing in this ordinance, if it is adopted, will authorize anyone to violate state law. And the City Attorney's Office, in working with the Police Department, will be very much out there enforcing the law. And that may be in terms of criminal prosecutions and criminal investigations, but it will also be in terms of civil Superior Court lawsuits for code enforcement. For example, we've had in the City Attorney's Office several civil suits pending for injunctive relief against dispensaries. Recently, we succeeded in shutting the dispensary at 27 Parker Way down. I walked down there yesterday and confirmed they're all closed up. There's a for rent sign on the building. And we've closed other dispensaries down. The one at San Andres and Mitchell Torina. Yet there are illegal operations. I think there are many forms of illegal operations, and we know this is a public concern. It's a concern of the city. It's definitely a real concern of the police department. But you've got people selling marijuana out of their garages, out of the trunks of their car, all kinds of out of their homes, all kinds of circumstances, surreptitiously, I suspect, out of commercial locations that aren't even really pretending to be in compliance with state law or being upfront about being a storefront location. And again, we will concentrate on, when circumstances like that come to our attention, we will concentrate on enforcing the law, both in the city attorney's office and the police department. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about this ordinance.
Thank you. I don't see any speaker slips on this item. No. Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Wiley, just to clarify, so the dispensaries in question, when the amortization period ends, would be filing for a new permit if they just so chose to?
Well, yes, they to do it right, they'd want to get in a year ahead of time to get through the process, but they could file for a permit at an allowed location, and there are some locations that under the 2010 ordinance are allowed and do not have permitted dispensaries right now.
So but once again, the ordinance calls for a maximum of 3, so if there was a queue, they would not have preference in the queue.
Right. We deal with that at the time that the application was up for approval. We'd have to figure out whether we had still any allowed locations, any permits allowed.
Thank you.
Mr. House?
Thank you. I don't have any problem with the what's before us today, but I do have a question for these 2 dispensaries, but also for the others that would be approved under our city's ordinance. The question I have is, if they're fulfilling the city's ordinance, if they're abiding by it, then I think, and that includes, of course, obeying the state law, but they wouldn't have anything great to fear from your office, I don't think. I'm guessing, but I'm concerned a little bit about some of the language you're using. There's no place that I saw in the state legislation, the laws that we're attempting to abide by, that actually talks about family members or very close friends or unable to distribute themselves or very small numbers of individuals or any of those things. There is a specific guideline that the Attorney General came out with that did indicate pretty plainly that storefront dispensaries may be able to qualify, could be operated legally. And of course, we've done everything we can here at the local level to have probably the tightest ordinance in the entire state of California. So my question is, if they're abiding by our very tight ordinance and they keep their, they operate a very clean organization based on that, they shouldn't have anything to fear, should they?
Councilmember House, no, not at all. I just, and I've said this before, the storefront operation that appears to be ostensibly a retail operation, it's going to be tough for them to comply with the state law in terms of not-for-profit and no one benefiting monetarily from the exchange of marijuana. That the most they can do under state law is to recoup their expenses and the expenses in cultivation. But yes, the answer to your question is, as long as they're complying with state law, then they're fine. And there probably are a few dispensaries in the state that are complying with state law.
Employees can be paid. Owners can actually take home income from there.
You see, right there, they can't have employees. You're not an employee if you're a member of a cooperative. I mean, I was in a cooperative in law school, and I had to clean the restrooms. That was my job. I was not an employee. That was the assigned duties. And I know my wife was in a babysitting cooperative, and no money was changing hands, but services were. You shared, and it was a small group of people. I think most of us have been in some form of co-op, and they don't have employees.
Wow. Okay, so we have a much bigger conversation than what's before us today. I from reading the law, I just don't see where you're getting that, Mr. Wiley, and we can maybe get some coffee sometime and have a discussion on it. But I do support what's before us today.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to summarize, because you talked for a while and people at home want to make it clear that what we're talking about with it here really only directly affects the 2 dispensaries, correct?
Yes, that's
okay.
correct, Councilman.
you said that they could reapply down the line, but they could reapply, as Mr. Rouse was suggesting, only if somebody else had fallen out, quit, shut down, that there was a vacancy, as it were. Is that correct?
Well, I think that may be true at this time, but it's hard to say until we get the application in front of us and know where exactly it is.
Right, but still, by the year 2014, we should really only have 3 legal dispensaries in town. Is that correct?
That's what I believe will be the case, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do plan to support the city attorney's suggestion. I'm a little chagrined that we're having to have this discussion, as everybody up here knows, I'm disappointed we're in this business in the first place. But hopefully what this will do will lead us towards, as Mr. Wiley pointed out, following the ordinance, being able to enforce our code the way it was laid out, and being able to keep faith with the folks that thought we were going to have 3 and that would be an enforceable ordinance. And so I will be supporting the motion.
Well, we need a motion to support.
I move to accept the city attorney's recommendation.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any about that? Then that passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, item number 16.
Agreements with Martin and Chapman Company and Donna M. Grindy, CMC, for election services related to the November 8, 2011 general municipal election.
Thank you. Ms. Rodriguez.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. The city's next municipal election to fill 3 council seats and vote on ballot measures will be held on Tuesday, November 8, 2011. On April 26, Council authorized conducting the November election as a vote-by-mail election. The purpose of today's report is to obtain Council's approval to contract with Martin and Chapman Company and Donna Grindy for professional services related to the administration of the upcoming election. Martin and Chapman Company provides election supplies and services and consultation for more than 400 cities, counties, and associations in the states of California and Nevada. Martin and Chapman has provided services to the city for the past 20 years, including assisting with the city's 2007 and 2009 municipal elections. Martin and Chapman Company will provide supplies and services related to nomination, mail ballot and precinct supplies, voter identification reports, vote-by-mail tracking program, voter information pamphlets, official ballots and supplies, ballot counting, including equipment and election night supplies, translation services, and technical assistance by telephone or in person. Donna Grindy is a retired city clerk who specializes in election consulting services, and she will be assisting staff with the election process. As a city clerk, Ms. Grindy successfully managed 7 standalone elections for the cities of Lancaster and Santa Clarita. She has also provided standalone election services to several tri-county cities, including the city of Santa Barbara. Ms. Grindy will provide assistance with the preparation of election resolutions, notices, and candidate nomination papers, identification of polling location and precinct workers, processing vote-by-mail information, supervision of canvassing process and preparation of reports, design of the Central Counting Center, and training city staff on the election process. Staff plans to return to Council next month, requesting Council adoption of resolutions necessary to schedule the city's election, which includes calling for the election, authorizing a vote-by-mail election, adopting regulations pertaining to candidate statements, directing the city attorney to prepare impartial analysis of ballot measures, and setting priorities for written arguments for ballot measures. This year, it's important to note that both contracts include a termination clause that allows either party to cancel the contract by giving a 7-day notice. And this clause is particularly important this year, especially if the state calls a special election in November. As we had previously reported with the statewide consolidated election, we would then be part of the county-managed election. And if that were to happen, we would be liable for costs incurred up to the date of the cancellation. And we have made all parties aware of this possibility. The City Clerk's Office proposed fiscal year 2012 budget includes $300,000 to cover the cost of the November 8th election. This concludes staff's presentation, and staff is available to answer any questions.
Thank you. I don't see any speaker slips for this item either. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Hi, thank you, Madam Mayor. What's the drop dead date then? August 14th, is it?
No, that's August 12th.
August 12th, thank
That's
you.
the 88th day.
So after that, we'll know for sure whether we have an all-male in election. Thank you.
As opposed to all female. No, I'm just kidding. I always said vote by mail election. MAIL. Just kidding. Any other questions? Or is there a motion?
Move the staff recommendation.
Okay.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you. Item number 17.
Increase in construction change order authority for the Santa Barbara Airport Airline Terminal Improvement Project.
Thank you, Ms. Ramsdell.
Thank you. For those of you who were not in office at the time, this has been a very long project, initiated the project and did the financial feasibility study to develop the amount of money that we could afford in terms of the terminal project. The study found that we could afford $63 million, and we based our project design on that amount so that we would stay within budget. However, in 2008 and 2009, we had, while the economy was not good for everybody, it was good for us in terms of we had a very favorable bidding environment. We adjusted the budget in preparation for the bond issue, which was a big part of the financing of this project. For example, on the temporary improvements and site preparation, the bids came in 23% below the engineer's estimate. On the airline terminal building itself, the phase that we're in right now, came in 28% below engineer's estimate. So the bonds were based on the bids for the temporary improvements, the temporary building bid, or terminal building bid, and then we purchased furniture, fixtures, and equipment separate from the construction contracts so that we would avoid having the markup the contractor would add to those items when we could order them separately. So we revised our budget to $54 million. And this just shows the distribution of that budget between the different phases of the project. We also identified project funding for a total of $55 million, and we actually identified more funds than our project estimate was due to FAA grants that were made available to us, our own airport revenues, and then we had $1.5 million in passenger facility charge revenue that was reimbursed to the airport, which you approved, I think, several weeks ago. And then, of course, we based the bond amount on the bids themselves. So this was available funding to us. About 69% of the project is funded by bonds, and they will be paid back through the terminal rents and passenger facility charge revenue. And then the other 25% was from FAA grants, and then the remaining 6% between airport capital and the PFC pay-as-you-go funds. Now I'll walk through the project construction budget, and when we get to the next slide, it's a little detailed, so if you'll just bear with me. This slide shows the first two phases of the project, the aircraft parking ramp and the temporary improvements and site preparation, which we budgeted at 9.2, but it came in again because of favorable bidding at $8.6 million. Those phases are complete. Phases 3 and 4 are the new terminal building and the relocation and rehabilitation of the 1942 terminal, parking and the road. That contract was $32.8 million. We have approximately $21 million remaining in that contract, or expended in that contract, and 11.5 remaining. The furniture, fixtures, and equipment was about $4 million that were budgeted. We've spent a little more than half of that and have 1.7 for any remaining items that we need to purchase. And that included the boarding bridges, the seating, the baggage conveyor system, some of the more expensive equipment items. The change order authority on the EMMA contract, or the terminal building contract, was $3.4 million. We've expended 2.9 of that, with 481,000 remaining, and that is the topic of our discussion today. Construction management was with the firm of HNTB. The budgeted amount was $4.3 million. We've expended about 2.7, with 1.6 remaining, and we are in negotiations with HNTB right now concerning additional costs to them because of project delays in terms of rain delays, and the change orders, of which is a topic of discussion today, has also caused them to have extra costs. So the total of the construction project was $54 million with all phases. We've expended about $38 million and have $16 million remaining. The change order authority that we're requesting today to add back into the project are the change orders that were caused by changes requested by the TSA and the airlines, is about $1.2 million, and so then that would adjust our budget upward to $55 million. These are the same figures that are in the council report today. The TSA and airline tenant request changes that were requested, all were requested after the bids were received, and some of the changes that both of those agencies requested were even after certain parts of the building was already built, like the concrete was poured or whatever. So we had quite a high cost in terms of electrical, plumbing, and data lines that had to be redistributed when they changed their layouts. So today we're requesting that you approve to increase the change order authority by $1.2 million, the amount of the unexpected revisions that were requested by the airlines and the TSA.
Thank you, and I don't see any speaker slips for this item either. So just to clarify one thing, even with the change order, the original estimate of the cost was $63 million. We're still under by about $8 million at the end of the day. So even with the change order, it's still much less than what we thought originally when we were looking into this project. Okay. Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Ramsdale, when you mentioned TSA requests, are those actually requests, or are they pretty much mandates?
Sort of mandates.
Thank you.
That was a polite way of putting it.
I thought that. Thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
What do we do or account for that $8 million that we raised, I guess, but are not using?
Well, since we adjusted the budget, we really had that $1 million that was over the $54 million. We had $55 million that was available to us. We just adjusted down the budget.
Okay.
We didn't purchase $63 million worth of bonds.
Basically,
for
what we
example.
did is we reduced the size of the bond issue that was the balancing, so we never issued those bonds, and so in effect the payments will be less.
Yeah, I understand. Good, thank you.
Mr. House?
Well, this continues to be just a really well-managed project that is going to produce dividends for the city for years and years. Just wonderful. I move that we authorize this increase and approve the transfer of funds.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay, that passes. Thank you very much. Any council member committee assignment reports?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Francisco.
I would like to report that COME, the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board, has been looking for a new general manager, and I've been on the search committee with Lauren Hansen, and we interviewed our top 3 candidates yesterday in person, and we'll be coming to a decision on that probably within the next week or two.
Thank you. Related, the Air Pollution Control District, as you know, Terry Dreschler is retiring, and the board is, it's been part of the interview process. There's a second round of interviews happening Thursday, and we should also know within the next month to 6 weeks, I hope, of announcing a new APCD director. So, anything else? Okay, we have a couple of closed sessions, if you could read those. Thank you.
Item 18, conference with legal counsel regarding pending litigation, and item 19, conference with labor negotiator.
Okay, we'll be adjourning from the closed sessions. Thank you very much.